Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video I'm going to be giving you my spoilerific review on the Transformers Netflix EARTHRISE series. Yes, I have indeed concluded all 6 episodes of the newly released EARTHRISE show, and I've got to be honest with you and say that I actually thoroughly enjoyed this particular chapter. I found it to be leaps and bounds better in terms of story arc and characterization than what we got from the Transformers Siege show. Now, as mentioned at the beginning of this video, this will indeed be a spoilerific review, so if you haven't already seen EARTHRISE, then come back after you have watched it. So to kick things off, I'm first of all going to be starting off by discussing with you some of the characters, my personal favourite characters, some of their weaknesses, and what I hope to see from them in the future. So to get one of the major critiques out of the way, the voice acting I found overall to be rather generic. Once again, that was one of my major issues with Siege, and unfortunately they didn't really perfect it here for EARTHRISE. There were only a very few amount of characters that I would be able to identify solely from their voices, as for the most part all of them sounded very similar. My personal favourites was the Quintesson, Megatron and Elita 1. Yes, surprisingly, Elita 1 was one of my favourite characters to come out of EARTHRISE. I found her to be one of the major redeeming characters from this particular show after absolutely despising her from Transformers Siege. I thought that in EARTHRISE she was a lot better. They were able to develop her backstory a lot better, I found, and I love how she took command over the Autobots and her various different scenes with Megatron. Megatron for sure has to be my favourite character out of all of the chapters so far. I loved him in Siege and I love him here in EARTHRISE. I thought he was fantastic and his voice acting has got to be the best on the show. I also love his characterization, and this could potentially be my favourite incarnation of Megatron to date. I just love how barbaric he is, yet there is this almost multi-layered aspect to him where you can certainly see him questioning his own morality and whether or not the decisions he makes are right and wrong. I also really did love Alpha Trion. Every single scene Alpha Trion is in, I personally believe he steals the scene. I loved his confrontation with Skylynx. Yes, Skylynx is indeed in this show, whilst for a very brief amount of time he once again certainly does make his presence felt. However, unfortunately I did find his voice acting to once again be rather generic. The Quintesson I found to be a great addition to the character lineup, and I'm really hoping that we can see him in the upcoming Kingdom show. I do believe this particular incarnation of the Quintesson was called Decius, and I thought that he was fantastic, especially when he or she cut off all of their faces besides the face of Wrath. I thought that was so awesome, and to me really showed how unhinged this particular Quintesson was. Now, the overview of the story for EARTHRISE is essentially just a carry-on from what we saw from Siege. Elita and the remaining Autobots are left to fend against Megatron and the Decepticons, and all of them on Cybertron believe that Optimus Prime and the Allspark did indeed perish at the Battle of the Space Bridge. Of course, they are indeed alive and are later captured by the mercenaries who awaken them from stasis and bring them to the Quintessons, as Double Dealer has been contracted specifically by the Quintessons, also known as the Creators, in bringing Optimus Prime and the remaining Autobots to them in order to be judged. Shockwave is of course remaining on Cybertron and is working as a project known as Nemesis, and in the first episode Shockwave is trying to persuade Megatron in order to harness the energon from the dilapidated Decepticons. I found that to be one of the highlighting sequences out of this particular show. You saw all of these Decepticons that were incredibly dilapidated, they were running low on energon, yet they were still so loyal to Megatron, and in the end Megatron did unfortunately betray them and killed them off in order to power up the Nemesis. To me that just showed how ruthless Megatron was and that he's really progressing as a character. I also found it quite humorous to see Megatron actually talking to the deceased, decapitated head of Ultra Magnus. There were various sequences throughout the show where Megatron would continuously talk to Ultra Magnus as if he was still alive, and once again to me that just showed that this particular incarnation is incredibly unhinged, and it also showed the relationship that Megatron and Ultra Magnus had prior to his death. After the Quintesson double crosses Double Dealer, he does help the Autobots to escape, and then Megatron does learn that the Autobots and the Allspark did indeed survive the Battle of the Space Bridge. This leaves him to go on a quest using the Nemesis to find the captured Decepticons, which lead both factions to a space bridge, which is when we are then introduced to Scorponok. I was thrilled to see Scorponok introduced into EARTHRISE, however was majorly let down by his character. I believe that Netflix and Hasbro really did Scorponok dirty here. He was nowhere near as awesome as I expected him to be. He wasn't a Decepticon nor an Autobot, and to be honest with you, I'm actually quite confused as to what faction he was, although he did create for a very awesome fight sequence where the Autobots and the Decepticons are indeed battling Scorponok, and that was one of the many true scenes that we did see throughout this particular show. Starscream then double crosses Megatron, and this here was really a running theme throughout the show. Starscream would continuously double cross Megatron any chance that he got, much like he did in G1, and I really did like the G1 homage between some of the characters. However, we'll discuss that later later on in the review. In an attempt to destroy Megatron and the Autobots, Starscream does fire a blast, which sends both Megatron and Optimus Prime into the dead universe, and this certainly was one of my favourite sequences out of the entire show, as that is when we are then introduced to Skylynx, and Skylynx has been living in the dead universe ever since Alpha Trion did battle him, and Skylynx essentially shows Optimus Prime an alternate reality where he does die. Once again, a very nice homage to the original G1 series, and he also does show him an alternate fate where he becomes Nemesis Prime. But my favourite sequence has got to be where we were introduced to Galvatron. Galvatron does come into the scene, very reminiscent of when we did see Megatron's body reformat into Galvatron in the 86 movie, which I thought was fantastic. I loved the confrontation that those two characters had, and I loved how both of those characters could coexist within the same scene. That is something that I'm really hoping we can see in the future. Unfortunately, Galvatron's time is cut very short, however I'm more than certain that we will see him in Kingdom, as when he is indeed retracted by Unicron, also one of the best scenes in the show, Galvatron does give Megatron the golden disc, which once again was another mind-blowing moment for me, and I'm pretty sure many other fans. In the last episode, the Quintesson has indeed taken over the body of Double Dealer, and is basically trying to annihilate both the Autobots and the Decepticons, of course failing to do so. However, she or he does cause significant damage to the Ark, which causes it to crash land on Earth, which in my opinion is a prehistoric Earth, as there doesn't appear to be any sign of human life, and then the closing shot is indeed what appears to be Dinobot emerging out of the bushes, and in the reflection of his eye, much like we've seen from some of the Kingdom artwork, is indeed the remnants of a crashed Autobot Ark. And once again, another amazing cliffhanger, and I am just so anticipating what Kingdom has up its sleeves. So definitely Earthrise in terms of story was for me a lot more interesting than what we got with Siege. Of course there were some slow episodes. I personally found episode 3 and 4 to drag on a little bit. There could have been a little bit more action. There really wasn't all that many fight sequences, to be honest with you, and a few shock moments for me were indeed the Skylynx and Galvatron introduction. I did like the scenes where Megatron would speak to Ultra Magnus, and as mentioned throughout this review, I did love the G1 references. Now, some of the dislikes of this show once again was Scorponok's characterization. I believed he sucked. There was this really cool scene where we do see what appears to be Omega Supreme about to go toe-to-toe with Scorponok and live out what I'm sure is many of our fantasies. However, unfortunately, Omega Supreme was merely just a projection by Mirage, and that scene was very quickly debunked. I didn't necessarily like the fact that Optimus wanted to immediately make a truce after Megatron had told him that Elita 1 was dead. Of course, Elita 1 wasn't dead, but Prime didn't know that at that present time, and literally seconds after, Optimus wanted to make a truce with Megatron, and this happened throughout the show on a consistent basis. There was at least 3 examples of where Megatron did double-cross Prime and did try to kill him, so Optimus certainly did not live to his mistakes. I also thought that for a show which is titled Earthrise, there was not really a lot of Earth. We only really got 20 seconds towards the final episode where the Ark does crash land, and of course we see Dinobot. None of the Autobots nor Decepticons do take on their Earth forms, much like we've seen from some of the toys, which also I found to be a little bit of a letdown, and as this does appear to be prehistoric Earth, we are unlikely going to see any of the Autobots change their alternate modes in the upcoming Kingdom show. But once again, that is merely a nitpick from what was otherwise a really interesting and gripping story. And so that brings me on to the conclusion as to what Kingdom will have in store for us. So we already know that Galvatron is going to make an appearance in Kingdom. I do believe Megatron will be killed off in some type of fashion, and then of course will be regenerated into Galvatron, and I'm really hoping that Unicron does play some sort of a role in that. Judging from the flashback sequence, it certainly does appear as if that will be the case. We are going to see the golden disc. We saw Dinobot, so we know the Beast Wars characters will be there, and we know that our current G1-esque Autobots will indeed meet them. So as far as story is concerned, I believe it's going to focus solely around the golden disc and the Allspark. Whatever the final result of that will be, who knows? I personally do not have any idea as to what to expect from Kingdom. As mentioned, Earthrise to me was definitely a pleasant surprise as far as story is concerned. One thing that I was rather shocked about is that there really wasn't all that many deaths in this particular series, unlike Siege, where there were actually quite a few surprise shock moments where deaths would occur, most noticeably Ultra Magnus and of course Impactor. Here for Earthrise, there really weren't all that many deaths besides when Skylynx did sacrifice himself in order to save Optimus, although we'd only just been introduced to Skylynx, so I didn't necessarily form that much of a connection with him as I would if the likes of Elita 1 or Shockwave was killed off. But overall, definitely a drastic improvement when compared to what we got with Siege. I thoroughly enjoyed the show, and I'm really hoping that they take the best bits from Siege and Earthrise and use them in order to make Kingdom the best chapter that we have currently got. So that just about wraps up my review. As mentioned, I really did enjoy this series. If you haven't already watched the series, then I highly recommend to do so, especially if you have seen Chapter 1. I found Chapter 2 to be a lot more enjoyable. I hope to see that Kingdom does improve in regards to action. Transformers are of course known for huge epic robot mode fights, and unfortunately we didn't really get a whole lot of that in this particular show. We also are yet to see Bumblebee, Elita 1, RC, Soundwave, Shockwave, any of those characters actually transform. This show really does lack transformations, so I'm hoping to see more transformations in the upcoming Kingdom show. But other than those few nitpicks, overall it is a very enjoyable chapter, so I really hope that you enjoyed this review. Please be sure to let me know your feelings down in the comment section below, and whether or not you agree with some of my thoughts. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and until my next video, I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.